Prominent Jerusalem Post journalist and analyst Seth Frantzman had an interview with Andreas Mountzouroulias for Pentapostagma. Mr. Seth Frantzman spoke about Turkey's provocation in the Aegean and in the Eastern Mediterranean, Greco-Israeli relation and the current situation in the Middle East.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we host in our web channel, in Pentapostagma TV, Mr. Seth Frantzman, Middle East security analyst. How are you, Mr. Frantzman? Thank you.
I'm good, thank you. Hi, good morning.
Good morning from Greece. Mr. Frantzman, what is your personal view of the current state in the East Mediterranean? Turkey keeps up the tension with constant provocations in every aspect of their foreign affairs policy.
Well, I mean, look, I think that Turkey, has laid out a kind of agenda in which it doesn't want to cooperate with other countries in the Mediterranean. It wants to try to kind of grab a huge section of the sea around Greece and Cyprus, reaching over to Libya, taking advantage of the fact that the Libyan government is very, very weak at the moment. And it's done that, and it has done that basically against, Cyprus, Greece, Israel, Egypt, and everyone else in the region. It had plenty of opportunities in which it could have just cooperated. And I think it's clear from the agenda of the Turkish nationalistic, increasingly extremist agenda. It has no interest in working with the EU or other partners, even historical partners that it used to work with.
Thank you, Mr. Frantzman. What is Erdogan trying to achieve with that policy? We can clearly perceive that he has created many wars fronts in Syria, Libya, and in Nagorno-Karabakh. Do you think that he will manage to create a huge crisis in the Aegean Sea?
Well, I think Turkey was pushing the envelope last year when it still had the Trump administration in power. And I think that it exploited the fact that the United States had basically become an isolationist country under Trump. And it felt that it kind of had a kind of carte blanche or blank check to do whatever it wants. I think now it looks like the tensions are reduced because I think that Greece and Turkey came very, very close to almost a military incident last year because, Turkey was using radars to track the Greek fighters, and there was also incidents at sea with the French ships. So they were really, really pushing up against, the maximum amount. But I think now Turkey is stepping back, and we're going to see what it's doing now is this kind of, let's say, duplicitous diplomacy to try to get Israel or Egypt or one of the countries to move closer to it so that it can kind of sink what it knows is an emerging alliance between the Israel, Egypt, Greece, Cyprus, and France.
Thank you, Mr. Frantzman. We have been witnessing a lot of fake news from Turkey lately. Erdogan first stated that he wanted an agreement with Israel and then with Egypt. What is Turkey aiming at with that controversial policy?
Well, Turkey, I think basically, if you look at what the statements are, Turkey wants, of course, to get a maritime agreement with Israel or Egypt. In order to do that, it has to ignore the fact that Cyprus exists. So it basically floats these ideas because Turkey's regime, the AKP, is very smart. It owns or controls basically all of the media in Turkey, and it has a massive number of English language outlets. So what it does is it puts out these kind of propagandistic, nonsensical statements saying that, Israel and Turkey could possibly sign a deal. Egypt and Turkey are close to a deal. There's no evidence that they're ever close to a deal, but you just put out this kind of media announcement, and then you have the interior minister or the defense minister say, well, yes, we're working on a deal, but there is no deal. So in the end of the day, you say to yourself, okay, well, what did Ronald Reagan say about the Soviets? Trust but verify. Okay, so let's say that we trust the Turkish point of view. Let's verify it. Where is there? There's no evidence of a deal. And any deal that would happen, Turkey gets everything it wants. What does Israel get? What does Egypt get? Nothing. It loses a friendship with Greece and Cyprus. And what? It gives Turkey some massive rights to the sea that Turkey doesn't have. So again, it's great for Turkey. It's like your neighbor comes to you and says, well, listen, we both have a front yard. Why don't I just take half of your yard? It's like, okay, but that's not a deal.
Yeah, thank you. Turkey clearly supports Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. How does this action policy of Erdogan affect Greece and Israel?
Well, I think the Muslim Brotherhood connection obviously means that Turkey is the main opposition to the current rulership in Egypt, which is Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, because of course he came to power after Mohamed Morsi was pushed out in 2013. So that's one important piece of the Brotherhood that was defeated in Egypt. And the Hamas, of course, is another piece of the Brotherhood. Its origins in the same place. And Hamas was pushed out of the Palestinian elections in 2006 after they won. They were isolated in Gaza. From Turkey's point of view, if you think of the logic of the Erdogan regime, the concept is that after 2006, Hamas could control the whole of the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority, and that Hamas would be the main negotiating power with Israel, and that Turkey would basically control that. And that after 2011, with the Brotherhood in charge in Egypt, they would also control Egypt. So from Erdogan's point of view, it was great in 2012 because they really had a huge, huge influence. Gaza, Egypt, they were really on the rise. Of course, it's all changed now. And I think, though, if you do look at what is Turkey's agenda, it has tried to sponge up a part of Libya, and it's trying to threaten Egypt a bit there, or pressure it. And it wants to use Gaza the same way to pressure Israel and the Palestinian Authority. So that's its geopolitics. And I don't so far has not been very successful. But Turkey always wants to incite. You see how they start to use the Jerusalem issue, whereas most of the Arab countries and Islamic countries have kind of pulled back from this type of far-right religious incitement. Turkey has not. Turkey's going in the opposite direction.
Thank you, Mr. Frantzman. Do you think that Greco-Israeli relations will strengthen even more in the near future? Do you think that the military relations between the two countries will proceed?
Well, Israel and Greece?
Yes, Israel and Greece, yes.
Yeah, I think that there's a clear evidence of a trajectory of joint cooperation, more naval drills, more use of Israeli drones in Greece, or leasing agreements, maybe special forces and other types of drills. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And hopefully also working with NATO and the US and EU countries. And I think it's also part of the wider spectrum of the Abraham Accords with the UAE and Bahrain, because UAE is also growing rapidly closer to Greece. And I think we could start to see a wider kind of system of countries, which is Israel plus Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, UAE, and Bahrain, India maybe. I mean, countries that share common interests and values and a common vision, and also countries that want to, increasingly work together economically, whether it's gas, and obviously when you have gas rigs, you have to defend them. So all these things are like a multi-layered sandwich. You can't have one without the other. It all works together well.
Mr. Frantzman, would Israel help Greece in an hypothetical war scenario against Turkey?
No, I don't think at the moment we're anywhere close to that. And if you listen to the Israeli assessment, I mean, from what I know and from the people I speak to, basically when they are asked, well, what about, Iran is a big threat, but we've heard that Turkey is an emerging problem as well, or as the IDF says, a challenge perhaps. They say, yeah, but listen, Israel has enough problems with Iran, the ballistic missiles and nuclear problems. We don't want a problem with Turkey. Actually, Israel's interests are not to stoke tensions with Turkey. Israel's interests are to grow positive relationships, but not create negative ones. So I think insofar as that can happen, that is probably why Turkey tries to put out these kind of apple and carrot, like, oh, let's do some sort of deal, because they understand that in the end of the day, I don't think Israel wants actually any type of real tensions in the Mediterranean. It does want to defend the gas rigs against Hezbollah or Hamas, missiles and things like that. My assessment is that there's not going to be a military confrontation anyway. But the degree to which these countries can work closely together and work in economics and oil or natural gas, all of that can be for the positive. It doesn't necessarily have to lead to a negative space. And I don't think Turkey is, brazen enough to really push a real military conflict, because everybody knows, that would be massively destructive for everyone. Whether or not some ships might run into each other or something, that's always possible, but not a real shooting war. I think that's maybe far-fetched.
Mr. Frantzman, my last question. What is the current situation in the Middle East? We are witnessing Iran's provocative policy. what it will be the final outcome of this crucial issue?
I'm sorry, which issue?
About Iran's provocative policy in the Middle East. Iran.
Look, Iran is, from Israel's perspective, is an existential threat to Israel. It's it is moving towards nuclear weapons technology. It is rapidly expanding the ballistic missile programs and the drone programs. Iran itself is not the most powerful country comparatively. It's actually quite weak internally. It has lots of sectarian tensions. But that doesn't mean that it can't build a nuclear weapon. I mean, North Korea is not really a powerful country, but has nuclear weapons. Pakistan is a bit of a chaos, but has nuclear weapons. So I think that is a very big danger for Israel and the region. If Iran were to develop a nuclear weapon, obviously other countries in the region will rush to do the same thing. So it's a big problem. And I think there's a question about how to restrain Iran, how to deter it. And whether or not it can be, its role can be reduced in Syria or Iraq, and whether or not the Houthis in Yemen can be persuaded or deterred from continuing attacks in Saudi Arabia. Look, wherever you see Iran in the region, you see poverty and chaos and extremism and violence. And that's a problem because the region needs more universities and better economy. It doesn't need more militias, and Iran doesn't seem to invest in anything except for that.
Mr. Frantzman, thank you a lot for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Ευχαριστούμε που μας παρακολουθήσατε. Αν σας άρεσε αυτό το βίντεο, μπορείτε να κάνετε like και εγγραφή στο κανάλι μας για να λαμβάνετε πρώτοι όλες τις νεότερες εξελίξεις. Μην ξεχνάτε να μας κάνετε σχόλια με την άποψή σας, καθώς η γνώμη σας είναι πολύ σημαντική για εμάς.